everybody to the Central Coast Not-for-Profit Forum. This is our fourth one for 2019 and the last one. And our topic today is donor relationships and fundraising. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the Duncan Jug people as traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today. And we'd like to pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Today's topic is on donor relationships and fundraising, and we bring back a speaker from last year, Bianca Crocker, who probably was our most popular speaker last year, and most feedback we got in terms of this is great stuff, we need to know more about it. And last year we did a bit more on the fundraising bit, but she touched on donor relationships and how important they can be for a not-for-profit and a charity to develop more sustainable streams of revenue. So she's kindly considered to come back to us again today, come up from Melbourne. Yesterday we had a workshop for a group of people who wanted to come to a more detailed session, and it was an excellent workshop, 4 hours, a lot of content, a lot of good material came out of that. I can see Sharon nodding her head down there. So we thank her for making the time to come up for both sessions. So Bianca is the force behind Fish Community Solutions, a business that works with small non-profits to build sustaining funding models so they can make a positive change to the world. Bianca is very passionate about this and has been involved for over 13 years and holds an internationally recognised certified fundraising executive accreditation. As I said, Bianca's come up from Melbourne and given her time very generously this year and last year, so would you please welcome Bianca.
Hello everyone, good morning. Thanks so much for coming along on this lovely spring morning to learn a little bit about donor relations and how to keep your donors engaged. It's a really important part of fundraising, and it's a really important part of for not-for-profits to be able to engage their supporters this way. So we want to make sure that, the content that we're providing to you guys as part of this forum is something that we think will be really valuable. So today's presentation is called The Power of People, and it's going to hopefully help you with some ideas and tips around building better relationships with your donors. So let's get started. What we'll be looking at today, 4 main things. The first one is why your donors are your true heroes. 7 tips for engaging your supporters. The most important word that we really have in fundraising. And then a few tips around ways to build your community support and why that's important for your organisations as well. So first up, why your donors are your heroes. As it says here, that a hero is a person who is admired for their courage, outstanding achievements, or noble qualities. So it's quite common in fundraising to hear people talk about heroes, and sometimes you're talking about the beneficiaries of your organisation that you might work for, or those sorts of things. From a fundraising perspective, we really need to think about our donors as our heroes, because without your donors, obviously, there would be very little that would actually be possible. Your donors are integral to achieving your mission. So unless you're an organisation who's primarily government funded, most organisations need to have their donors to be supporting them. So if you're actually doing community type fundraising, your donors are going to be really important in the work that you do. And generally donors really want to make a difference in the world. That's why they're supporting a not-for-profit organisation, because they believe in your cause and they believe in what you do. So for these reasons, we see from a fundraising perspective, donors as the heroes in the situation. So what does that mean? So having donors as your heroes, one thing is though, it's not to be taken literally. We don't need to talk to our donors about them being heroes. That's not a desire of theirs. They don't need to know that we think that they're the heroes in terms of using that language. Because there's a lot of not-for-profits out there that have taken it quite literally, and they'll use the word hero in talking to their donors. Many of you probably donate to your own causes like that you're passionate about, and what you'll see is that you're not doing it for the accolades. You're not doing it to get the recognition. Most people are donating to organisations because they're really passionate about a cause and passionate about making change in the community and building with you. So they don't, our donors don't want to hear this. So that's one little word of warning that I'll have there in regards to talking about your donors as heroes. What we need to do though is make our donors feel like they're the heroes, and we can do that in a number of ways in how we communicate with them. So by doing this, it's important that we keep them at the centre of your communications. In yesterday's workshop, we did a whole piece on donor-centred donor-centred organisations. So that what that means is putting your donor at the centre of all of your decisions and all of the work that you do as an organisation. Because by being able to do that, that shows the donor that you're actually really interested in what their needs are and helping them connect and engage with your organisation. So what's really important with having your donors as heroes is understanding obviously their motivations, because they're not likely going to be motivated by hearing the fact that we think that they're heroic. So how do we engage with our donors? The next few slides I'm going to talk you through are 7 tips to engage your donors. So this is really important, again, like I said, to make sure we're connecting with our supporters. So I use the word donors a lot. So depending on your organisation, you might say your supporters and things. The reason I choose to use the word donors because technically, a donor is someone who has given your organisation money already. I would sometimes use the word supporter for other people that might support your organisation, but they haven't actually given money, but that's just a technicality, I guess. So the first tip is about getting to know them. This is really, really an important thing. What we need to think about when we think about our donors is that relationship. So forget about the money that they are giving to your organisation and just really focus on the relationship. You know, a friendship that you might have with someone. It's really important that it's seen to be that way. I often say to charities that I work with, you know, fundraising is not at all about money. And I get very strange looks when I say that to people, especially when they're all frazzled because they've got budgets to meet and, fundraising event next weekend and they're tearing their hair out. But it's really not about money. Money is just the vehicle that makes things happen. So if you can connect people with your cause and really explain to them why you need to do what you do in the community and what the need for your service or program is, then that's how you're going to raise the money. So if you build those relationships with people, the money will follow from that. If you're building the relationships, obviously, with the right people who are interested in your organisation. So the first one is, like I said, get to know them. So it's important that you find out who they are. We can do this in a few ways. We can do donor surveys. Many organisations will do annual surveys to their supporters, or every 2 years some organisations do it. So there's really simple ways you can do it. You can use Monkey Survey or Survey Monkey, always get that one muddled up. That's an online survey platform. You can ask 10 questions and you can do that for free using that system. So it doesn't have to be anything complex. The good thing about doing an online system is it makes it easy for people to do, an online survey, makes it easy for people to do, and it also can help you collate and analyse some of the results at the end. So the reason why donor surveys are important though is because we get a time to get feedback from our supporters and ask them what's important to them. So you might ask, why do they support your mission? What do they believe in? You might be thinking about starting something new in your organisation and you can get their feedback on that. But you can also ask them really basic things like, what type of communication do you prefer? Do you prefer email, phone or mail? So the thing is though, if you're going to ask these questions, you really need to make sure you listen to their answers. Because if you ask me if I want to receive phone calls and I say no, and then next week you ring me, that's a little bit irritating, because then I was like, well, you just asked me, why are you not listening to what I've said? So that's important. And the other great way to get to know people is, believe it or not, you can talk on a telephone. It's very unusual that people do that these days, but it's a very good skill to have. And talking on the telephone with your donors and your supporters, I know it takes a little bit of time, but it's really, really great thing to do to be able to connect with people. So, you might be like, oh, we've got so many supporters, who will I ring? Well, depending on your organisation, some ideas are if you get a first-time donor, so someone who's never donated to you before, but a first-time donation has come through, maybe you can take the time to give them a call and say thank you. And then sometimes other organisations might make phone calls based on a donation amount. So again, depending on your organisation, if you've got a lot of supporters, you might say, okay, any donation over $500, we're going to give them a ring and say thank you. This is also a really good activity if you need to get board members involved in your organisation a bit more actively. Getting them to make thank you phone calls is a really great thing to do, especially for the board members that are like, oh, I don't want to do fundraising, that's the dirty word. Picking up the phone and making a phone call is really an easy thing to do. And it's one of my favourite things to do in regards to fundraising work, because people are so happy to hear from you. I'm on the board of quite a small charity, and we don't have a huge amount of supporters, so we call just about everybody but we split it up between the different board members, and making those phone calls is really a great thing to do because people are happy to hear from you. If they're busy or something, they're not offended that you've called. They'll just kind of keep it short, but then you get off the phone. But sometimes you get to hear some really important feedback. You know, if we've just done a mail appeal to them, we can ask them about that. You know, what was it in our story that resonated with you? And they might say, oh, well, you told me a story about that little boy or the little girl that went to the school in Afghanistan and she hadn't been to school for 3 years or whatever. So, you know, we can get a feel then for what's important for our supporters to continue to hear. So after you get a donation from someone, you want to make sure that you keep connected with them before the next time you're going to ask for a donation. So you want to make sure, you know, you have that friend that you only ever hear from every time they want you to do something, or maybe it's your brother, he wants you to come and look after the kids and you're like, Auntie B can't come and look after the kids, that's the only time you hear from him. So you don't want to be that person. You want to make sure you stay connected with people throughout the relationship and keep them updated. So regular contact is important. How regular, again, depends on your organisation and depends on what news you've got to tell them. If you've got something to say, then like regular emails, like monthly emails, is not too much. If you've got lots happening and you want to make it fortnightly, then that's fine. If you have a monthly but then something else exciting has happened, you might want to put a new one in there, then that's okay as well. As long as you've got something to talk about, I think that that's a good reason to communicate with people. Updates are really important. So if you've had a campaign that you maybe ran 6 months ago and when you had a number of people support it, you want to keep them updated. I donated to a crowdfunding campaign in February. They have provided me with 2 updates. So they provided me with an email update after they sent me the thank you and all that sort of stuff, but then they provided me a separate email update telling me that they were going to do the project that I had funded. And then recently they actually delivered the project and they sent follow-up email. And it was really nice to get the email because I'd kind of forgotten that I'd given that money and I just expected that they were going to deliver the project. But now they've sent me an email saying we've delivered it and everyone had a great time, so thank you once again. So that's really reaffirmed my choice to make that donation to the organisation. And the updates, emails are a really easy way to do updates, but you know, if you've got postal addresses for people, sending stuff in the mail is really nice as well, and it doesn't have to be expensive. I worked at an organisation and it was a rescue helicopter service in Queensland, and we got some photos printed on, like postcard type style paper, so not on photo paper, and we just had a stack of them, and then sometimes we would, if we wanted to tell someone something, we would just write them a little note on the back of it, but then they've got a nice picture as well. So, we just had them printed at Big W or Kmart, so there wasn't an expensive exercise to do that either. Newsletters, again, a lot of people are moving away from printed newsletters and just doing email newsletters. Whatever works for your audience and your supporters. Some people really like to get newsletters in a printed form, but that's something that maybe you can talk to your supporters about. If you've got an older support base, maybe those people do want to get something in the post. So that's, again, something to consider. Yep.
I've got a question on newsletters. I get a few.
Yep.
I don't think I've ever finished one. Comment on what's an optimal size or length of a newsletter?
I would say probably, like A3, so 4 A4 pages is nice. I do see some that are 8, so, like double-sided. But again, it's probably what the content is, and how often. So I do some work with an organisation, a conservation organisation, and they their newsletter they found was getting bigger and bigger because they had stories to tell. So they actually ended up doing it 3 times a year instead of twice a year and keeping it a little bit more condensed just for that reason. But again, sometimes it's about asking your supporter base what they really want to do, because one thing that we don't want to do in fundraising is make decisions based on what we do as individuals, because unless we are typically the donor type person of our organisations, but a lot of the time that's not the case. So yeah, the other thing is some organisations now are moving towards like magazine style. That sounds a bit too fancy though, but again, the organisation that I'm on the board of, we were doing newsletters, but they were getting a bit bulky and stuff. So we actually cut our newsletters back. So we do 4 email newsletters a year, and in between that we do 2 magazine style things, and they're printed, but we only send them to select supporters because they do cost a little bit more.
Just on that, when you turn around and do your newsletters or your journals electronically, do you turn around and put a whole article in, or rather a half a dozen words, a picture, and read more?
Yeah, that's a great question, thanks. Best practice for electronic fundraising or electronic communications nowadays would be to do the second option. So you're putting part of it and you're pushing people to your website. So a lot of organisations though, they don't have capacity or they don't have the knowledge on how to do these sorts of things. So they've got the electronic, they've got like a PDF of their newsletter and they send an email and they just attach it. The challenge with that is email systems are getting much smarter, and so a lot of those will end up in people's junk mail. One of the easiest ways to do it is to use MailChimp or a similar type service. And because MailChimp can also track your open rates, so you know if actually people are reading, or well, you don't know if they're reading it, you know if they're opening your email, but you can also track your click-throughs. So what that means is if you've got maybe 4 stories, it will tell you at the end of your campaign or whatever which stories people clicked through to. So again, that, you know, if you've got a few different programs but one program is always getting the click-throughs, you might say, okay, well, maybe we should put a bit more information about that. The other reason why that's really important to do is because the whole aim of EDM, like electronic communications, and even social media, is really to get people to your website. So those things are just connectors to push people to your website, because it's on your website that people can sign up to emails if they haven't already, if they're on social media, or they can make a donation. I know you can make donations on Facebook now, but generally it's on your website where you want people to go. So the more things that you can get people to do on your website, the better. Social media is a fabulous tool to keep people updated. So the really good thing about social media, but it's also a challenging thing, is you've got lots of different audiences, more than likely, in your social media networks. So you will probably have a whole bunch of people that have never donated to your organisation. So again, they're the ones I'd call supporters that are connected to your social media and, you know, your Facebook friends or whatever, but you will probably also have some donors. So that's a really good thing as well, because as long as we are aware of that, we need to make sure we're putting content onto our social media that is both for people that know and understand our organisations and for people that want to learn a little bit more. So you might want to manage that content in that way. Social media is great for photos and videos especially, and then where possible, pushing people through to your website is a really great, it's a great tool to do. You can also now, if you do have just quickly on social media, sometimes the world of social media can be a bit too much for everybody, but if you don't, if you're a bit overwhelmed by social media, I would just say focus on Facebook. If you're not on social media, you should be at least on Facebook, because 90% of the population are on Facebook. Facebook's biggest growing area is people over the age of 50 in terms of users. So we can no longer say, oh no, I have older supporters, they're not on Facebook, because the majority and the reality is that people are. If you've got younger audiences, maybe you don't need to be on Facebook.
How often do you post?
That's the lucky question. How often do you want to post?
Oh, once a week, once or twice a week.
Okay. How often do other people post?
Several times daily, depending on the time of day.
Okay. Do you do that? Or do you have someone else that does it at your organisation?
One on our team does it.
Yeah. Yeah. Any others? Thoughts?
Every week.
Once a week?
Something goes out at least once a week.
Yeah. So,
Mainly when we've got something that's coming up, not right. So that might be fortnightly, weekly, or monthly.
yeah. Facebook's really tricky because Mr. Zuckerberg likes to just change it up a bit just to show everyone that he actually has the power. I'm pretty sure that's the only reason why they do it. So the algorithm of how Facebook works changes regularly. So, and I don't really understand even what the word algorithm means. I just know that that's what it is. So it's all the back end stuff. So how they decide who sees what content and all of that sort of stuff. So a couple of things is nowadays doing 2 or 3 posts a week is completely fine. You don't need to be doing multiple posts a day. You can if you've got things to say, but just because you're doing multiple posts a day doesn't mean you're going to be top of mind to people in their newsfeed. That definitely used to be the way because you're like, well, when I go on, it was always by most recent, but that's not how the algorithm works. So there's other measures in there. One of the other measures of how to make sure people are seeing your thing is, unfortunately, you do probably need to spend some money on Facebook. So if you do some paid advertising, your other posts, and your paid advertising ones, will be more likely pushed higher up in people's news feed. But the good thing is, Facebook advertising is probably one of my favourite types of advertising because you can target it very, very well, and you don't have to spend a lot. You could be spending $5 a week, and that's enough to just get that recognition. So post a couple of times a week, 2 to 3 times, try to spend a little bit of money. And the other thing, make your content engaging. So again, sometimes it can be pushing someone to your website. Sometimes it might be telling a story about one of your beneficiaries, or it could be telling a story about a volunteer. You really want people to engage and notice what is getting the best engagement. So you can look at your insights on Facebook and see, which ones are getting the best engagement. Most of the time it'll probably be things where it's about a person, just because that's the nature, unless you're an animal organisation. Then pictures of puppies and things always go well. And the other point there is to be available. So make sure when you're sending out communications with people that, that you've got ways for people to get in touch with you when they might want to give feedback. So whether it's your mobile number or your email address or whatever, you don't want people having to go to searching for that stuff on your website and just getting the info email address. Best to give people the contact details for you. The third tip is being honest and trustworthy. Again, this one seems like everyone's like, why would you write that there? Of course you have to be honest and trustworthy, but of course, it doesn't always mean that's what's happening. So I think it's really important to be mindful of this. And again, it comes back to building those friendships and those relationships. The friends that that you're most connected with, you can trust them and they can trust you, and that you're being honest with them. So that's a really important thing. So you want to be able to make sure you have a personal connection. Now, when I say that, doesn't mean that they need to know you personally, but it's more about if people are asking you questions, then you need to be able to respond in a personal way. And if someone, if you're asked a question and you don't know the answer, then you can say that to someone. I don't know the answer to that question. I'll look into that, with our financial manager or something, or whatever the question is, and then get back to people. So that's really important for building that trust with people. So that's the personal level, but you also need to be trustworthy as an organisation as a whole. So that is how do you look in the community? How honest are you as an organisation? Are you making sure you say you do what you say you're going to do? So if you are raising money to do a particular project to build a shed or something, you've got to make sure that you do that. In reality, it's only granting money where you have an agreement that you actually legally have to do what you said. So a lot of fundraising comes right back down to ethics and morals, but you want to do the right thing. If you've told someone you're going to build a shed, then that's what you need to do with the money. And if there's something happened and someone donated you the shed, so now you don't need to spend that money on the shed. You might go back in touch with people and say, look, we actually, after you all donated this money, the shed company has donated us a shed. So now we don't need the money for the shed. But what we're going to do is spend all that money on buying all the tools for the shed. I don't even know why I'm talking so much about this shed, but that's just an example. Do you know what I mean? So it depending on what you're doing. When I worked at an organisation, the Rescue Helicopter Service, the helicopters were always fueled with petrol, or aviation fuel at the airports, and we were looking to. We realised that was one of our biggest expenses. So if we could actually purchase a fuel truck, that would actually save us some costs in the long run. But there was obviously going to be a big outlay of money for the fuel truck. So we had a fundraising campaign that we did to raise $150,000, or however much it was, to buy this fuel truck. And we were successful in that. But just near the end of it, we had one single donor that came out and gave us a very significant donation to go towards the truck. It almost covered the whole cost of the fuel truck. So what we did was we wrote back to all of the supporters that supported that campaign, and we said, so what we're going to do, because we've raised way more than we needed to, we're going to put all of that money specifically in a separate account and use that to buy fuel for the next 6 months or however long that money lasted us, which is not very long. Aviation fuel is very expensive.
Can I make a comment on that one? We're a donor organisation, we give out money. And that is the hugest one of the lot. You have organisations that apply to the government for funds, to the council for funds, to organisations for funds, and all of a sudden all three get approved.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden when you go back to give them a cheque, you find out they've already got it in front of them, and why do they need the money? That's number one. And it's quite frustrating when you turn around and organise $10,000 or $20,000 or $30,000 for something. And the other one is you run into professional fundraising, who people have paid money to write the thing out, and they want half the money. And if you come into an organisation and find it out, they just walk away from you.
So when you say professional fundraising and they want half the money, what do you mean?
Well, you have some organisations that get people to write a funding program out for them.
Yeah.
And that inside that program is also what they're going to earn, their commission.
Okay.
And all of a sudden you find some of them are up to 50%.
Yeah.
And the fastest way to deal with that is walk straight away and say, yes, that's very nice. No, you didn't tell us about that. Goodbye.
Yeah. So I would, as a professional fundraiser, absolutely say people should be getting paid to do fundraising. But also, conversely, as a person that is a member of the Fundraising Institute of Australia, one of our code of ethics is that you do not work on commission-based work. So it's flat fee. So it's not like a sales job where you say, if I raise this money, I'm going to get 10%, 20%, whatever. That's not, because that's generally not an ethical way to do fundraising. But it does happen. I understand that. But again, from an organisation's perspective, you would want to be making sure that you're checking that information out before you go into an arrangement with someone to do that. The other part about what you said first is the different people that, a charity might apply for money from 3 different places. That is also common practice in not-for-profits, because the reality of it is about a 10% success rate in grant writing is usually, it's tough. So it's probably quite unusual that I think maybe I've had one client or one charity that I've worked with in 15 years that has applied for the same pot of money from different places and actually been successful and got the same amount of money twice. And then you go back and you have that conversation. That's kind of a good problem to have. The key, though, I think, is making sure you have that conversation as the organisation. So not to wait until, 12 months later we spent the money and this is what happened. So the thing, thanks for that point, the thing that you're talking about is when you are applying for grant money, whether it's government grants or council grants or a philanthropic trust or foundation, you need to make sure that you are open and transparent with them. And that comes back to this honest and trustworthy thing exactly. Because the other thing to remember in Australia, and I don't know all your organisations, they might be locally based organisations, they might be statewide, whatever. The Australian philanthropic community is not a particularly big one. And funders talk. They meet regularly, they do philanthropic gatherings, and they will talk. And if you become known as an organisation who doesn't acquit your money or doesn't, be honest about where you got new money from when you've already got some money, that word travels quickly, and you'll probably struggle to get money in the future. So that's what I mean when I'm saying about, from an organisation perspective, you need to be trustworthy as well. So again, it's just being open and transparent about it. Generally, people get nervous, they're like, oh no, but they gave us the money, I don't want to tell them that something's different because I might take it away. Majority of the time, they won't take the money away, because the majority of the time, they believe in your organisation, that's why they're giving you the money as a funder. They believe in your project and they want to work with you. So if you have had some things change from when you applied for the grant application to when you're actually getting the funding, which sometimes can be 3 or 4 months, and things do change, it's part of life, you just need to be communicating that with the funder. And most of the time they are accepting of that, and they welcome that conversation. So the 4th tip for engaging your donors is being all about them. I talked earlier about being donor-centric, where you need to make sure that what you're saying to your donors is really putting them at the centre of what you're doing. As we've talked about, your donors are everything. They are the heroes. Without your donors, your work wouldn't happen. So I know we often talk about our beneficiaries as the poster kids or the people that our organisation focuses on, depending again on the type of organisation you are. But generally speaking, that's good. They're the stories we want to tell. But when we're talking to our donors, we want to make sure that they understand that we know without them this wouldn't be possible. That's what that's talking about there. And you want to make your donors feel special. That's another way to make sure you engaging them. So some ways of doing that is involving them. Different ways you can involve your donors might be invite them to be involved in volunteering. So having volunteers, a vast majority of volunteers with organisations do end up becoming donors. So there's a high correlation between those two. And the reason is because those people are very engaged and connected with the cause. So they really understand what it's all about. Other ways to involve them is you might get, if you need to do some research about something, you might invite some of your key supporters in to do little focus groups or something like that. You might get them to help out at a function, or you might get them to come and tell their story. That's another great thing to do. If you have an event that's for donors, like a thank you event, you might get one of your key supporters to come and actually share their story about why they decided to support your organisation. Seeking their opinion is really important, because that is a really key way that we can feel valued as a person. Our friends and family, when they come to us and ask us for our opinion about something, that's one way of them showing us that they must really care about us and value us, because they want to know what we think. So again, that's why a donor survey is important, or those little focus groups and those sorts of things. But again, if you're going to ask questions, you need to make sure you're responding appropriately. If you've got your organisation mission, and say you've just gone through a whole process developing a new value and a new vision, and a new mission for your organisation. And then at the end you've got it all chosen, and then you take that mission and vision to your community and ask them, do they like it? Unless there's a chance that you're actually going to change it. If they say no, don't ask that question. You're probably better to include them along the process. And get your board involved, again, with making people feel special. Those phone calls, again, I've made many, many thank you phone calls to donors in my fundraising life. But interestingly, the phone calls that I make as a board member on the charity that I'm on the board with, they seem to have a really different feel to them. People respond differently when I say it's, Bianca, I'm on the board at Indigo, when I call them. They're very responsive to that. It's just a different level. So getting your board involved in helping people feel special, helping your donors feel special, is really important. And this is a really good thing to remember. This is really everybody's job. It's not just your fundraiser's job or your marketing team's job. It's everyone in your organisation, from the receptionist all the way up to the board. Everybody in your organisation should understand the value of your supporters. So that's the whole message that your organisation is always putting out there. Okay, number 6, let them know how they've made a difference. So again, this comes back to the updates that we were talking about, but it's really important to report back to your supporters and donors about how things are going in your organisation. It's a really great thing, where possible, to use your program staff if that's the structure of your organisation. So if you're an organisation that has some key staff that do admin, fundraising, all that type of stuff, but then you have actual people that are working in the programs and service delivery area, then get them involved. And their skills may not be, talking in front of people or whatever, but it doesn't need to be. If you've got an event where you've got people coming along, and you say if you're a research organisation, having the researcher come out and share some of the news is a lot more engaging and interesting for the people involved. And let them know that they've made a difference by saying thank you. Again, that seems like an easy one, but it's not, and we're going to touch on that a little bit more. And the last tip is to inspire them. So as I said earlier, fundraising isn't about money. It's really about, there's a guy called Ken Burnett. So if you haven't heard of him before, I really suggest you should write that down. His name's Ken Burnett. He's from the UK, and he's a brilliant fundraiser. He's been around for a very long time. He's sometimes called the grandfather of fundraising. He wrote a book about 25, 30 years ago called Relationship Fundraising, and sort of he was the one that coined that term. And basically, it took fundraising from the space where fundraising was transactional to being relationships. And that's what we're trying to talk about here today. But Ken Burnett famously says something along the lines, he says lots of great things, but one of the things that he says is, fundraising is not about money, it's about showing people that they can make a difference and then inspiring them to do that. Because again, people are supporting your organisations because they believe that their contribution is going to make a difference in the world, or in the world that you create with your organisation. Just as a side note, in addition to Ken's relationship fundraising book, that's like it's kind of textbooky, he has another book called The Zen of Fundraising. It's a little super easy read. I highly recommend it. It's like 72 nuggets of fundraising and relationships building with your donors. So it's kind of like the Cliff Notes version of his textbook one. It's a really good one though. So inspiring your donors is really important. The best way we can do that is by telling them stories about the work that you do. So telling them stories about your volunteers, telling them stories about outcomes that you've had, telling them stories about all the people and the things that you do at your organisation. While you're telling those stories or communicating with them, you want to make sure you're using emotive language. That's important. And again, showing them that they can make a difference. You might see a lot more communications from charities now. They will talk about specific dollar amounts, like $25 can buy this, or $36 will buy this. The reason that fundraising has sort of gone in that direction is because people want to understand that their contribution can make a difference. Because most things that we support, our $25, $50, $100 donation is not actually going to solve the problem of that organisation. So you might be talking about a really big problem, but you need to make it tangible and break it down for your supporters. So that's why that type of method in communication is really important. So the most important word in fundraising, we did allude to this just a moment ago, is thank you. And again, I know I just talked about this and I said, it seems really basic, but so many times I work with organisations and they don't do thank you well or at all. So that's why I wanted to talk about this today. Your supporters, you need to remember, they don't have to be supporting your organisation. They have, there's 700,000 not-for-profits in Australia. There's 55,000 charities. And there's about 25,000 or so that have tax-deductible status. So even if you say, oh no, they're donating because they get a tax deduction, they've got a choice of 25,000 odd charities to support. So you need to build a connection with them. And if you have built a connection with them, or they're inspired by what you do and they choose to donate, if you don't treat them properly, they will not come back again, or they will go and support other organisations. So this part of saying thank you is really important. So aside from the ask, which of course you do need to ask for money if you want any money, one of the most critical parts of your success is the need to say thank you. And we need to, you can't say thank you too much really, but you need to be making sure that you're saying thank you as soon as you're receiving the money, but then you're saying thank you at other intervals as well. And there's different ways that you can do that. You want to make sure it's done in a timely manner. Some organisations have strict processes and procedures around that so that they're making sure that, receipts and thank you letters are going out within 24 hours of them being received. For some smaller organisations, that's not possible. You might have the person that processes your donations only works on Mondays and Tuesdays. So if you receive a donation on a Wednesday, they're not going to get processed till the Monday. That's okay. You do what's most possible for your organisation, but it should be within a week, at least. Personalised. The more you can personalise your thank yous and any of your communication, really, the better that is. So that might include, the name of the person, obviously, and making sure it's right, not calling a Mr. or vice versa, making sure the spelling's right, but also it might include the donation amount. So, dear Bianca, thanks so much for your $27 donation. And if they've supported a specific project or campaign, you can put that detail in there too. However you can personalise it, the better. If you are in the middle of a campaign and you've got some details about where the campaign's up to, you might include that information as well. Your $27 really helped us. Now we're on our way to having 60% of our project funded, etc., etc. So personalise is really important. It's also really great to invite feedback. Again, so this is in this sort of a letter, I would have a sentence, like we love to hear from our supporters. So if there's any feedback you have about this campaign or any other work that we do, feel free to get in touch. You need to provide the updates, which we've already talked at length about. As I've already mentioned, this is a really great way to get your board involved in fundraising. If they don't want to make phone calls because they're really scared to do that as well, even just getting them to handwrite little postcard notes out to some of your key supporters is really important. And if you're trying to work out, if you do get a larger number of donations and you're trying to work out how do we know which ones we should put a bit more effort into, again, working out on the donation value is important. Maybe it's that you take your top 20% of your donors in terms of donation value, and you might focus on them. Or it could be that you say, okay, well, we get a lot of donations under $100, but we don't get that many over 100, so we might do something like that for donations over $100. And I know in the workshop yesterday we did a bit around, creating a bit of a plan around that. Because if you have a plan for it, well then when you're getting all the donations coming in, there's a process of how it's all done. So thank you letters, like I said, they need to have a personalised greeting. They need to have something engaging at the start. Identify the donation amount, explain how the donation is being used is really important, and ideally something different to what you've told them in the letter that you asked for the donation. So not just the same text, as in obviously you're talking about the same project, but something a little bit more that you're going to tell them. Another nice thing to do is if you've told a story, say if you, if you're building a shed for a men's shed or something, and then in your actual story that you write out in the campaign, you've got a guy named Michael who's talked about the benefits of the shed, you might put a quote from Michael in your thank you letter as well, just to tie that back in there. So often you read thank you letters and they're just, thanks for your donation, here's your receipt. It's just, it doesn't show much care that you've gone to. What's also important with your thank you letters is to consider the signatory. This is also for all of your appeals or any other communications that go out to your supporters. The reason that that's really important is because for many organisations, especially if you're doing you've got a lot of supporters, they may not be able to have a one-on-one relationship with you at your organisation. So the way you build those relationships with people is through communications, like email or direct mail. So if you always chopping and changing the signatory, that donor doesn't feel like they're building a relationship necessarily with anybody. So often it might be a president or the CEO or you know, whoever, that you have their name as the signatory, because then over time, your supporters are feeling like they're building that relationship with that person. You know, again, when I worked at the Rescue Helicopter Service, that was a big organisation, so we had a lot of supporters, but Ashley was the CEO's name, and he was one of the founders of the organisation, so been around for a long time. So all of our correspondence, or not all, but a fair majority of it came from him with his name on it, as in he didn't write them, the fundraising and marketing team wrote it, obviously he's got to see it. But we would get so many letters back and feedback from our community members that was addressed to Ashley. Like they'd be, "Hi Ashley, thanks so much for your letter, here's a donation," which is always really interesting. But the important point about that is that they feel like they're connecting with the organisation in that way. So it's important to consider that, who that person might be.
Don't ever sign a letter off M. Smith. Because don't sign the letter off as M. Smith, because the person who's got to reply to it doesn't know whether it's male or female or Mrs. or Ms. Do away with, put Margaret Smith or Michael Smith. And if you're a female, if you want Ms. as a part of your address, put Ms. there, please. Otherwise you get offended.
Yeah, I would absolutely on the signatory put the person's full name. For sure, and the title, the business title as well, is probably a good thing to do. Another handy little trick to have in a thank you letter, as in any of your other letters that you do, is to have a PS. As someone who has a writing background, so I studied writing at uni, that's kind of what I majored in and blah, blah, blah. But so when I first heard in fundraising, oh, you need to include a PS, I was very confused, because a PS is a postscript and it basically shows you've forgotten something and now you need to tell me something. And I'm like, well, if you've done your writing properly, you shouldn't have forgotten it, you should include it in the letter. So for my, planned brain, I was like, that doesn't make any sense. The reason though, and I think when I explain it to people, they understand more. The reason though is why this is recommended, especially in persuasive writing, which fundraising effectively is because there's been studies done around the psychology of how people read a letter, and generally they'll read who it's addressed to, so have they used my name and spelt my name right? Then they'll look at the signatory to see who's writing them, and then they'll look at the PS. Because generally the PS will ideally, unless it's the PS as in the real thing, your main point of your letter can be seen in the PS. So that's the psychology behind how people read letters. So having a PS is really good, because if the person isn't going to read your whole letter, at least they'll get that. So conversely, and I know we're not talking about sending out letters for asking for appeal and campaigns, but if you are doing those things, making sure your PS has another ask in it is very, very important. Yep.
Is that the same for email communication? Because email, you generally have, your organisation.
Like your subject and all that.
Email signature.
Yeah.
Disclaimer.
Yeah. No, it's not the same, I wouldn't imagine, in electronic, because people read electronic mail very differently. But it's more about printed paper and how they do it.
Give an example of that, because if you just thank somebody in a letter, you can't sort of say, oh, by the way, we need money for this too.
Oh, no. So that's just another, no. Don't ask for money in a thank you letter.
Oh, right.
I don't even have that as a tip.
PS, you said the PS.
The PS? Yeah, the PS, you need to include a PS.
Yeah.
And you're saying thank you again in it.
Oh, thank you again.
Yeah.
Right.
You put, sorry, I confused everybody. You put your main point in the PS again.
Oh, okay.
So the reason I said you ask again is because I jumped back to, if you were writing the letter to ask for the donations, where you've asked for the donation in the letter, you ask again in the PS. But then in the thank you letter, you say thank you, and then you say thanks again in the PS. In a different way, you don't just write thanks again, you write it in a different way, but that's a really important thing to do. And just while we're on that again, I know we're not talking about the appeal writing, but if you are sending out letters to people, you should be asking for donations 3 times in an appeal letter. Once is the PS, 2 is in the body of the letter. The first time should be within the first 20% of the letter. And when I say ask, you need to say the word, donation in it. Do you want to give us a donation? Or can you consider You know, don't just say, oh, support us, or don't just tell them a lovely story and then, you know, you read the letter later and it hasn't actually asked for a donation. You can't just tell someone a lovely story and put the donation slip at the bottom. They know why you're writing to them, so just be honest and open about it and just ask. The font choice in all of your letters is very important as well. A little tip is if you're doing emails, so screens should use sans serif font. I just always have to think what they both mean. And your printed letters should use serif font. So, does anyone know about sans serif and serif font? So you've got all different types of fonts. So it's Latin, so serif means, well, I don't know exactly what it means, but it's about feet. So this choice here is sans serif, which means no feet. So see, there's no like little tails here on the things, and I choose that because it's going to be seen on a screen. If you've got something on paper, you would have like Times New Roman, and you know how it's got the little feet on the bottom of the letters. So that's what I'm talking about. Does that make sense? So that's just, again, the way people read and stuff is better for that way. So I've always thought it's interesting that newspapers don't often, in their main text, they use serif font, a sans serif font, which is very interesting. And also font choice, but also size. You know, don't go below 12 if you're printing something. And if you know that most of your supporters are over the age of 55 or 60, do a size 13 font or 14, don't be shy. Okay, different ways of saying thank you. Certificates, that's a common one. But again, that's a really nice one. Emails is a great one. This is a sample email that Charity Water is a big organisation. I know we're not all big organisations like Charity Water, but if you want to learn how to do really good donor communications, you should donate to Charity Water. Just give them $50 online, and their communications are very, very good. The way they talk to donors, the way they show donors that they're very important. So that's a good example. Social media is great. This one here is from an organisation, BirdLife, and they actually thanking this guy Simon, who actually did a crowdfunding campaign for their charity. That was their organisation's way of thanking him, was by doing a post. Obviously, again, be mindful of the donor's privacy. I wouldn't just be going splashing Facebook posts for everybody, but depending on the situation, social media is a great way. That's quite specific, but and this is another organisation that did a thank you for Marilyn, who was doing a big bike ride for this organisation. They're a charity out in the Hunter Valley. Another really great way to show your thanks is to do videos. And videos can be very, very simple. They don't have to be Hollywood produced. The thing about videos is, especially if you're, people are getting lazier and lazier when it comes to reading communication. So videos are a really good, easy way of expressing things to people and to get their attention. So I'm just going to show an example of a 30-second video that an organisation did after they did a crowdfunding campaign. They did a video. So this is the Foster Care Association in Victoria. They did a campaign to raise $10,000, wasn't a big one, they're not a big organisation, to do a carers retreat for the foster carers. So this organisation supports foster carers across Victoria, and they do get a lot of government funding, not a lot, but primarily their funding comes from the government, the state government, but that's really to do education and things like that. What they really realised there was a need for was to look at the well-being of the carers. So that was something that wasn't funded by the government, so they did some fundraising around that. So this video was made, but the point of me showing it is just to show you it's quite a simple video. So that's super simple, and it doesn't look like it's, famously produced by anyone amazing, and it wasn't, because it was produced by me, if you can use the word produced. But as in, I filmed that for this organisation when I was working with them on this phone. That was all filmed on this phone. It was all put together on this phone. They were all different snippets that I filmed. And there's iMovie app or whatever it's called in here. I don't even know what it's called. I don't really even know how to use it, but I worked it out. And we made a whole bunch of videos. So the point of showing you that is videos don't have to be fancy. They don't need to be fancy. One thing that YouTube has brought to the world is people's ability to accept that video doesn't have to be highly produced. But the interesting thing is we did a few videos throughout the campaign. We did an introduction video. We did a few different milestone ones across the month of the crowdfunding campaign. When we launched this video, they put it on their Facebook page and it was shared so many times it was ridiculous. It was quite amusing really, because I was just like, The last little bit that I just wanted to share with you, again, some of the reasons why people are important at your organisation obviously is to be able to use fundraising then to build your community and to build your networks, because that's how you connect with more people. So that's why community fundraising is very important, and it can take different forms. You can have community events, you can have what we call peer-to-peer events, and you can also have crowdfunding, which I've touched on a couple of times. So I'm just going to go through each of those now just to give you a very basic idea of what each of them are and a few tips around how you can do them better at your organisations. But I wanted to include this in today's presentation because it really does help tie back into how so we've gone through how you can engage your donors and how you can keep them connected. But these are some ways where you can do these types of things to help build your numbers of donors, ideally. So community events, anyone that does any fundraising type events or any events really knows that they're not easy to do. They're a lot of work. I have a love-hate relationship with events, but I think they are really important. So because they sometimes help us raise money if that's what the purpose is, but they also help us connect with people and help build our organisation's brand and do a whole range of other things. So this slide here just shows us a couple of different types of community events. So when your organisation says we want to do an event, it doesn't have to be a gala ball. It can just be, there's lots of different ways. This event here, obviously, I'm sure most of you know this, RSPCA, they do the Million Paws Walk. It's been around for ages. It's a very big logistical event in many places around the country. But this point is, yes, it's a fundraising event for them because you pay a registration fee to get involved, but it's really a way, it's a very clever way for this organisation to connect to their potential donors. So if you've never donated to the RSPCA, but you've got a dog and you go, oh, they're going to do the dog walk, I should go walk my dog and join in, well then I've signed up, and so I've helped them raise a little bit of money on the day and got some brand awareness, but they've also got a whole new contact list for people that they can then start targeting. Because if you've got a pet, it probably is safe to say that you're interested somewhat in the purpose of what the RSPCA does. So that's a really good reason to do that type of event. Some events do challenges, you know, like big physical challenges, climb Mount Kilimanjaro or whatever. This one here is a walk. This one's the Tassie branch example for the Cure Brain Cancer. So that's another thing, get people involved that way. This one up here is the charity that I'm on the board of, Indigo. And so this was a snapshot of our Sydney dinner. So we have a dinner each year in Sydney, Canberra and Melbourne because we're based, you know, we're a virtual organisation, so we do international development, but we have a lot of our supporters in those areas. But it's not a big fancy dinner. We did have 140 people, I think, at this dinner, but it's just at a golf club, like at the golf, you know, it's not, you know, $200 a head, come along to the, you know, fancy dinner. It's really just about bringing people together and sharing what you do. So that type of event can be really good as well. And this one is something worth thinking about. This is the Daylesford Polo. It's a relatively new event in Victoria, in the beautiful Daylesford region. But what's interesting about this is, as you can see here, it says in association with TLC for Kids. So TLC for Kids is a charity based in Melbourne. This is not their event. The Daylesford Polo is an event on its own, and they've partnered with that organisation. So this is what we would call like a third-party event, generally. So you've got somebody else in the community that's running an event, like a third party, separate to the organisation that you can partner with. So if you're limited for time and resources, looking out to what's going on in your local community, what big events are happening, and how can you potentially partner with them is one way to do that type of community fundraising too. So a couple of tips for your community events. Make sure you allow suitable planning time, and I would say more than a month. I would ideally say 6 to 12 months, depending on your event. But again, depends how much stress you like in your life. Make sure you set your objectives for your event at the outset. So if it is going to be a fundraising event, of course you're going to have some fundraising dollars in there as your objectives. What I always recommend though, and I would always say to people, is fundraising events are not ever going to just be about the dollars. Because if they are, you're wasting a whole lot of time and effort. So what I mean by that is other objectives should be about how well you're engaging people. So, you know, keeping track of who's coming to the event or the numbers, or you want to engage so many new people. Because there's only so many ways that you can bring new people into your networks, into your world, and events is a really good way of doing that. So make sure you've got some other objectives around those sorts of things. Consider your target market and the type of event. So like I said, the RSPCA event that they do is very clever because it's got a whole bunch of different goals for them. There's all different events out there that you can do that will be suitable for your organisation. So if you have an older supporter base, maybe doing a swim in the ocean is probably not the best thing because maybe that's not going to appeal. Unless you were trying to get to a new target audience, then you might do something like that. The other thing with consider the target market, is again thinking about sometimes board members. I think, again, I'm a board member, so I don't not like board members, but there are some board members, they get fixated on certain things. Like often board members like gala balls. And I don't know why, they just maybe don't have anywhere to wear their suit and they just want to wear their suit or a fancy dress somewhere. But I would always say to people, make sure if they're asking for you to do these types of events, you need to say, well, how are we going to sell the ticket? Because a gala ball ticket's going to cost $150 upward. So do you have people in your audience and in your networks that have $150 to pay for dinner? And unless there's a resounding yes, you need to reconsider what you're doing there. Ideally, you want to try and have a point of difference. Again, this is getting more and more challenging in a crowded marketplace of lots of different charity events every weekend. There's probably a different event everywhere. But where you can have a point of difference, it's really going to help your cause. Use your volunteers. You might have volunteers on a committee. You might have volunteers helping out at the event. All of these sorts of things. You might even engage new volunteers to help with your event, depending on what you're doing. But make sure you do work with them well. Make sure you give them a good outline of what you need them to do. Having position descriptions and those sorts of things for volunteers is really important as well. So then you manage everyone's expectations. Having a budget is really important if you're going to do an event. You need, there's not very many events that you can do that's not going to cost anything to do them. So you need to have an understanding with your team, your management at the outset, what's our budget, how much are we allowed to spend to do this, and then work out that it's going to actually be possible. And then you need to market, obviously, your event, promote it in the community. There's many ways you can do that. All of the things we've talked about, emails, social media, etc. You might like to talk to the local media. You might like to try and, depending on what you're doing, you can do letterbox drops as well, so you don't need actual postal addresses. There's a range of things, but you need to make sure you allow enough time to do that. So if you are doing an event, sometimes people send out a save the date. A lot of people do that with weddings and things now as well, because they're not quite ready to send out all the information, but we've got the date booked, so let people know about that. That's a really good thing to do. And the other point I'll make about events, which I think is very, very important, is to plan your follow-up. I know a lot of people when they do events, and if you've done events here in this room, which by the looks of some of your faces as I've been talking through this, you're nodding and getting frustrated at the thoughts of doing events. One thing that's really important is to make sure you plan your follow-up, because if you only ever do what you do at your event, you're wasting a whole lot of effort as well. So what I mean by that is your thank you letters that you're going to send afterwards, your thanks to the sponsors, any certificates, any surveys to follow up with people, all of these sorts of things, you can get them ready before your event. And you can make sure you've planned them into the process. And the reason I say that is because usually after an event, everyone's like all frazzled and like, passing out on the floor and stuff. So you want to make sure you actually have this plan so everyone knows that There's going to be still a few things to do after the event, but you've got most of the work done.
Just a question.
Yep.
Community events, the recruiting of sponsors,
Yeah.
servicing of sponsors.
Yeah.
And I find that one of the hardest things for us to do. And I'll actually already put down, maybe that's a workshop in itself.
Yeah.
How you service a sponsor,
Yeah,
how you
yeah.
get a sponsor on board, then maintain them, and what they'll need to be satisfied that that event's something they want to continue to
Yeah,
do
yeah.
with.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about business partnerships and stuff in the workshop that we did yesterday, because you're right, you can do, I mean, there's whole days where people can go and learn about sponsorships and partnerships and how to work with businesses, not just for events, but more generally. So you're right, there's a whole lot to that. I guess the thing I would say on sponsorships for events is thinking about what you need before, again, in the planning stage of your event, thinking about what you need and trying to find a good alignment is always really important with businesses, especially these days. Businesses, you know, the majority of businesses are involved in charitable giving in some way. So they're looking for ways that really connect with them or their staff or their, you know, the values of their organisation. So if you can try and do that, that's the first hurdle. And then it's also about finding connections. So rather than cold calling, I mean, sometimes that is what we have to do. But if you do have a list of businesses that might suit your partnership opportunity, you want to be able to try and find ways to connect with them. Does that help? But the servicing, you're exactly right, is sometimes really tricky. So don't over-deliver and make sure you have a plan, a service agreement in place. Sometimes businesses can get a little bit cheeky in terms of the demands that they then place back on the charities, and charities are all nervous because they gave us all this money, we've got to do everything they say, and everyone goes a bit weak at the knees. But you need to make sure that you have all that set out in the beginning. So this is what you're going to get from it. And you know, if it's an event, usually there's a time period. But if it's not an event and it's a longer partnership, I would even have stuff in that agreement around how often you're going to meet with them. So we're going to meet every quarter, or we're going to meet monthly if it's a bigger partnership or whatever, but have that all in that plan there so that you're managing. Again, it comes back to expectations really. Peer-to-peer fundraising, does anyone know what that is? Yeah, a few of you? So peer-to-peer fundraising is where you have a number of people acting as the champions or advocates for your organisation. It's a really great type of event or community fundraising to do if you do have limited resources at your organisation. And there's a few ways that you can do these things. So basically it's where someone's doing something and they're getting their friends and family to sponsor them or to donate to them to raise money for their chosen charity. Yep, so they're seeking their donations. They're doing a challenge. So, you know, it could be a fun run or those sorts of things. MS Readathon is probably one of the oldest peer-to-peer fundraising things that have been around. Some of the benefits is there can be lower cost to run and operate. Again, it does depend on what you do, but they can be. They are a really great way of engaging your supporters. And nowadays they're really popular with younger audiences because younger people generally have less disposable income to make donations, but this is a way that they can feel that they can, you know, support you by helping fundraise for your organisation. It also helps build that connection to the cause. So the person that's doing the fundraising is doing so over a period of time, sometimes a month or longer. And so if you keep in touch with them during that time, then you're able to help build that connection with them over that period of time. It's also a great way to help build your brand profile in the community because you've got all these little advocates out there talking about what you do. And it can open new networks for your group. A couple of examples, MS Readathon is probably the oldest one that I know of that's been around for many, many years and obviously has changed its format and thing over the years to reinvigorate it. Dry July, you may have heard of. That's an organisation doing, you know, you don't drink any alcohol for the month of July and you get your friends to sponsor you. Do It in a Dress. This is a campaign by an organisation called One Girl, and they're based in Victoria, but they do work in Africa. So they basically came up with this campaign where they say if you wear a school dress, just like one of these sorts of school dresses, and you get people to sponsor you, if you raise $300, then we can educate a girl in Africa. I talked about this one in a workshop in a bit more detail yesterday, but they are doing quite well with this campaign now. It was for the first week of October originally because it was connected to International Day of the Girl. Then it grew, so now they run it through the whole of October. The good thing about this is the organisation doesn't really have to do a lot. Like, they're not actually putting on an event. They're just giving people the tools, supporting them, and it has grown a lot, so there is a lot of work involved for them, but it's giving choice, so you can do whatever. So this guy here, he's gone snowboarding in a dress, got his friends to sponsor them. People have gone doing crazy things like skydiving, and other people have said, I'm going to go to work for the whole month wearing a school dress. And some of that doesn't sound that interesting, but what's interesting is the majority of people that do this campaign for them are males, which I love. And the really good thing about this for them is it's very tied into their brand. You know, it's very visually, visually appealing, I was going to say. It depends who's wearing the dress. No, you know, it's very visually significant. Like, okay, someone's wearing a school dress, I'm going to send someone to school in Africa. Kind of makes sense. And it is unique as well, so it's a good one. And then there's also peer-to-peer campaigns such as the Australia's Biggest Morning Tea, which you're probably all aware of. That has obviously grown to monstrous proportions, but that originally started in its most basic form as a peer-to-peer thing, where people were saying, the Cancer Council was saying, have your own morning tea, you raise the money from all your friends, family, workmates, whatever, and you bring it to us. The Cancer Council do now actually do big morning teas though, so they are running events, but that was not the original intention. But they're just a few examples for you. A few tips, make sure you're harnessing the power of online giving. So there's a number of online platforms you can use to help do your peer-to-peer fundraising. Go Fundraise, Everyday Hero, My Cause, or a couple of those ones. It's really important that you're empowering your fundraisers. So make sure that you are providing them with tools and information about your charity. Even, you know, you might write template emails that they can copy and paste and use to share to their friends and family, or even social media posts. You know, the more you can give people, the more you're empowering them to go out and do what they want to do for you. Utilize social media, and also encourage your fundraisers to use social media and motivate and encourage them. So staying connected with your fundraisers throughout the time that they're doing the campaign is really important. Any questions on peer-to-peer?
Some might actually start off doing it informally for you. And when does it get to a point where you need to formalise it? Because they're just taking it on themselves to do it.
What do you mean, like to do an event?
Yeah, they'll have an event, or they'll organise fundraising for your charity, but you've really not even asked them to do it.
Yeah. Oh, that's like a good problem to have, because, you know, people are out raising money for you. But I understand for some charities that can become really tricky, depending on the person as well who's doing it, or the group. It's a tough one, because you really want to try and build those relationships. Again, there's a few things. Sometimes people are just out raising money for you, and you don't even know. And they just turn up on your doorstep and give you $4,072, and they say, oh, we did a trivia night and here's the money for you, or whatever. They're kind of good, because you didn't know about it, you didn't have to do anything really. But you also have your brand to think about as well. So where possible, you encourage people to let you know. So some organisations have like what they call maybe do-it-yourself fundraising, or that third-party fundraising toolkits on their websites. So you can go to the person's website and find information. So that would have in it, the packs would have information about what type of events to do. You know, here's what you need to do. Register, tell us that you're doing the event, because then we can help you. We can help you with some tools and things. That also then encourages that line of communication. To be honest though, legally they need to tell you, because legally you need to give them an authority to fundraise, you know, letter, because you are the entity that holds a fundraising license, or the fundraising registration within the state of New South Wales. So, you know, it's technically it's illegal to do a fundraising event without that authority to do so. I've never heard of anyone, you know, getting into trouble for it, but that's part of the reason why you want to encourage those things. So if you don't have any of that sort of stuff, the best thing I can tell you to do in any fundraising always is a strategy that we call CASE. It's copy and steal everything. So within reason, of course, but what I mean is there's no point reinventing the wheel. all of these big charities, Cancer Council, Starlight Foundation, RSPCA, they'll all have these kits or these packs that I'm talking about on their websites. Go and have a look, print and download a whole bunch of them, have a look at what they do, and then make your own based on that information. It's not rocket science, it's just about putting that together. But then if you have that available on your website, or for when people come and tell you they're doing an event, then you can just hand it to them. So that then minimises your time that you're spending with them, because you've got a pack for them. But then over time, hopefully you build that relationship as well. Okay, crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is basically where you're getting a group of people together to support a particular project or one particular thing in a point of time. They're usually time limited. Most of the time a crowdfunding project is run for 30 days. So the process is a lot longer than 30 days. You've got planning and all that sort of stuff, but the actual live fundraising time is about 30 days. Much more than 30 days gets a bit long in the tooth and it can stretch out. Much less than 30 days gets a little bit tricky to do, but you can sometimes have a crowdfunding campaign that runs just for 2 weeks or a week even. Raising money through a group of individuals. It is a growing source of fundraising for Australia. Primarily this is done online, and there are a number of websites there that you can use as the platforms. Now, depending on these platforms will depend on the way you do your crowdfunding. And what I mean by that is, generally speaking, crowdfunding is a pledge system. So you say, we need to raise $10,000 to, like if I talk about that foster care one that you saw the video for, we need to raise $10,000 to do a carers retreat. So generally speaking, what people will do is make a pledge. Okay, I pledge to give money. So you take all these pledges and they only get converted into actual donations when you raise your target of $10,000. So that's what we call an all or nothing crowdfunding campaign. So that's how crowdfunding really is, you know, how it's meant to be. Fortunately, that was very scary for some charities, and people weren't meeting their goals, and then they were not getting any of the money at all. So fortunately, there's been a few of these sites now that actually don't do the all or nothing campaign. So you just get what you fundraise. So even if you don't meet your target, you still get all the money. So there's pros and cons to both of those, because again, because you've got to think about, okay, if you go back to the shed example, we're going to build a shed, we need $20,000. If you only raise $10,000 and you've already got $10,000 for people, how are you going to build, if you know the shed's going to cost $20,000? So what are you going to do then when you've actually told everyone that that's what they're specifically raising money for? So there's things to think about in that place. Top tips for crowdfunding is you need your crowd. Some people think that if I go and set up my crowdfunding on Pozible, because Pozible's probably the most well-known, because they don't just do charity fundraising. So crowdfunding has been very popular in arts, in the art world, for like musicians and artists and things like that, when they want to, you know, do their own independent artwork or, you know, make a record label or something. Or make an album. And also businesses, a lot of startup businesses can use these sorts of platforms. So Pozible's very well known, but they do have a lot of people visit their website. But some people will think, oh, well, if I set up my crowdfunding on Pozible, well, then I'll get more people to see it. But that's not the way crowdfunding works. You might get 1 or 2 people, but you're only ever going to get onto the Pozible homepage if you're actually already going gangbusters and they want to put you on the homepage. You know, you can go, if you go to any of these websites, you can go there and search, dogs, and it'll bring up all the campaigns around dogs or animals or whatever. But you're still then competing. So the real good point is that you need to have your own crowd. So you need to have a good social media following or a good email database, etc., etc. It really only suits projects or one-off expense items. So not ongoing costs, things like that, something that can be defined in a specific space and time. And what's really important is, even though I said the campaign might run for 30 days, there's a whole lot of planning that goes on before it. So the campaign for the Foster Care Association that we ran in February of this year. We started planning for it, I think, in September of last year. Because there's a whole bunch of things that you need to do beforehand, and you also, that 30 days, you want to be running hot when that 30 days is on. You want to have planned, you know, a media release that's already going to go out. You want to have planned social media posts, planned electronic mail, etc., etc. You want to use digital methods as much as possible to push people to what you're doing. Video is really important. Again, that campaign I said, we had a launch video. I think we had 3 videos throughout the month from different people. One was from a carer talking, one was from the president giving a halfway update of how we were tracking, and maybe there was another carer as well in there, and then we had the thank you one at the end. Because ideally, in an ideal world, what happens is you get your most attention with these things because they get shared. You know, I mean, ideally, the ultimate goal is that your campaign content goes a bit viral, and that's how you do really well. There was a campaign, there's a charity in, just outside of Melbourne called Edgar's Mission. They're probably another really good charity to look up if you're interested in how to communicate really well with your supporters. They do particularly well on social media, so they're an easy one. You don't even have to make a donation to get what they're doing. You can just follow them on Facebook, on social media, and see how they engage people. Now, they have lots of cute animals as well, so it's sometimes be easier, but they're basically a farm animal rescue place. They did a campaign, I reckon maybe it was 5 years ago now, maybe even a bit longer, where they'd bought some land. They had to move their farm, so they bought some land just not far from where they already were, but they needed then money to raise money to, you know, put the barn on it and to do all the other bits and pieces. So their initial goal was $50,000, and they have a very good communications marketing guy who is very good with his iPhone videography, a lot better than my particular skills. And Kyle, he does really good. And like I said, they've got lots of animals and, you know, pigs and sheep and lambs and geese, and they do some really funny, engaging stuff. But they made a video and to launch their campaign, and the video went viral, and they raised $50,000 in 3 days. And they were like, oh, what do we do now? We only needed $50,000. So they did it, I think they did it on Chuffed, on the Chuffed website. They actually then worked with the people at Chuffed to help them further develop the campaign. So then they did another video that said, okay, well, we've met our target, but now we've got all these other things we want to do. So then they started raising money to build the fences for the paddocks, all sorts of things. They ended up raising I feel like it's $60,000 or $70,000. It was more than 3 times their original goal. They generated something like more than 1,200 new supporters to their organisations from over 10 different countries. So and at the time, that was a record in Australian fundraising for crowdfunding campaigns. So that's not going to happen to many other people. But what my point is, if it's a really good case study to look at. So that, if you do want to have a look at that one, you can look on the Chuffed website, because all old campaigns are still there. So you can go on the Chuffed website and just type in Edgar's Mission, or the campaign was called Raising the Roof. So the point is, they had some really good videos. You know, they had videos of like all the pigs. I don't even know how they did it. They had one with the pigs walking along, and they were carrying like all sticks in their mouths and walking along, and the footage was saying, you know, we're trying to build our new home, will you help us? Like as if they were going to build their own home themselves. It's very clever. They do very good stuff there. And they're a really good organisation. And also, you want to have support from the media where possible. If you can get some local support, that is great as well. Local media support throughout the campaign. And again, sometimes you have to plan that. So you might want to talk to the local editor or journalist or something before you launch a campaign to say, we're going to be doing this, would be really great if we have your support during the campaign, just so they are aware of it. And that's the end of the presentation. Thanks.
I would like to thank Bianca. This is the second year that she's come up from Melbourne, and early last year we didn't know Bianca at all, and we were just Googling and trying to work out who could fill this topic, and we saw a few of her bits and pieces on the web. And we just asked her, would she come up? And this is her business, doing this sort of thing, and she's a sole trader and obviously has to make a living in life, but she gave up 2 days of her life last year to come up, and she's done it again this year. And as Chris pointed out, she's just opened a Pandora's box in terms of topics. So, I mean, we've already got topics to invite her back next year. She doesn't charge us for it. She does it out of her own pocket. We pick up her out of pockets. But, you know, a couple of days out of her life as a sole trader, I think, you know, is tremendous. So,
I'm from Melbourne, so it's not so hard to come up here. It's beautiful.
Actually, she was telling us a story yesterday. I think it was last year. We put up at the Crown Plaza, and she got upgraded to a suite. And the suite was bigger than her apartment in Melbourne.
It was.
So she doesn't mind coming up, but it's a big ask and a big effort on her part. So we're really appreciative. Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
So, some of the feedback we've got through these 2 years about these sessions is we can't get all of our board to come. We want them to turn up, and they say it's a really good idea. How do we get the message to the rest of our board? So, in the last forum we did a few months ago, we announced this, and we've actually done this a couple of times. So, if you want a testimonial, Peter Lawley from Legacy's here, and I'm sure he'll let you know. We've condensed some of these forums into a 1.5 hour intense session, which we delivered to the whole board. And we've done 3 with Legacy so far, and I think they've been well received. So where possible, we can do it. Now, the fundraising one, I'm not an expert in fundraising, so maybe not that one, but we've done the earlier programs, responsibilities, governance, accounting, strategic management, all those sort of things. So if you're thinking, I need to take this message back to our board, Fortunity's happy to come along and give you a session to the whole board. We do it at lunchtime with Peter's group, and they feed us, and we have a Q&A after as well. So that works pretty well as well. I guess we'll be also sending out some feedback in the next short while to get ideas of topics that you'll be interested in for next year. We haven't done a lot of work in next year's program yet, and its format. So any suggestions we can get from the group about how these work for you or don't work for you, what sort of style you'd like, what sort of content you would like, we would really appreciate that feedback if we could get it. But we'll probably send something out in the not too distant future. In closing this year's forums, I'd like to also thank all of our partners in doing this. Most of these guys are clients of Fortunity, and they help us with content, they help us with the focus group, they help us with feedback as well. So I really like to acknowledge their involvement and appreciate that they've helped us out through the last couple of years. So thank you for attending throughout this year and last year, and we look forward to engaging with you again next year. Thanks very much.